Hi everybody, so I went to the Pilates convention over the past weekend and I had a freaking amazing time. So what was really interesting about this one was that it was split over 2 days. So the first day was all about the mat. Now, in true Pilates style, we started off with the convention with the 34 moves. And I think that really sets the tone for the whole day because it was fast, it was energetic, and it was fun. And it was hard work. It's not one of these things, one of these places that you're going to sit back and just learn things passively. You're in there, you're moving, and you're learning at the same time. So I absolutely love that. And as many times as you do it, it's such a hard thing to do continuously. I think sometimes we stop and we break things down. It was just such a pleasure to move through all 34 moves seamlessly. Now, I interviewed Joe a while back about why it's so important as an instructor to know and do the 34 moves. So check that link out for that video somewhere there or there. I don't know, I'll figure it out. So, after that we had presentations from Mark Leyland and Adrian Bell. And so Adrian talked about breathing, which sometimes we can forget to cue. And he also talked about cueing from fascia, which is really interesting. So fascia is so popular right now. Adrian then talked about sort of sports injuries. So that was really interesting to understand some of the principles about what goes on in some of those injuries. And he did a really interesting session on coupling. So when he talked about coupling, he talked about sort of using different planes of movement at the same time. So it's interesting because we probably do it instinctively as instructors, but he talked about things like using flexion with lateral flexion, and it just made sense to me. So I actually tried it with a couple of clients this week, and on moves like Mermaid, whereby I felt they were struggling a little, and when I coupled a little bit of flexion with their lateral flexion, their movement just seemed more seamless and they felt better through that movement. So it worked. Who knew? So Jo then went through a couple of sessions and she did a double band session. So that was a lot of fun in being able to see how to replicate some of the studio equipment moves, like feet and straps on the Reformer or some of the arm work on the Cadillac even, and being able to replicate that in a mat setting and get just as much concentration and just as much tension and just as much work through the limbs and through your center as you would on the large equipment. And then she did this session on unbend. And it was about extension, it was about rotation, it was really about tweaking those moves to just take it a little further. So it really complemented Mark's session on coupling really well. And I remember walking out of that session thinking, I just needed that for me. So there's this scene in When Harry Met Sally where Meg Ryan is sat at a desk or at a table or something, and she's just screaming yes over and over again. That's exactly how I felt walking out of that session. I'm not going to make the orgasm sounds because my mum watches these, so yeah. Okay, so day 2 was all about the studio equipment. Now, for those of you who've been to my class, you know that I mostly teach on the large studio equipment like the Reformer, the Cadillac, the chair, barrels, and so forth. So for me, this is what I was looking forward to. This is my jam. So, what I really liked about that day was that there's not a lot of conventions that focus on the large studio equipment, so it was just such a pure joy to be able to immerse myself in that. So again, for that day we had Jo and Adrian delivering sessions. So Adrian delivered a session on twisting and rotation, which is really great to be able to do on the Reformer. He also delivered a session on sport-specific injuries and what to do for cyclists, for golfers, so that was really great. And he also did a session on the barrels. Now this is a piece of equipment I tend to shy away from because I can get quite stuck in what to do with it, or I get really monotonous in what I do with it and I get bored of it. So it was great just to have some fresh inspiration to help me with my class planning. Jo went through a couple of sessions herself. So she went through a pure mobility session on the reformer, and this was just a joy. I can't tell you how much of a privilege it is just to be able to take a class from her, because she has this way of just allowing flow to come through, and you just feel like you're effortlessly doing these things, and you just feel open and brand new by the end of it. Jo also delivered a session on a studio circuit, so that was really great to see how to implement all these different pieces of equipment, like the Cadillac and the Reformer and the Wonder Chair and the barrels, in a circuit-style class, which flowed really well. Now, I think my favourite has to be the correction clinic. And if there was anything that I would say is that it wasn't long enough. I wished it was longer. It was so great just to see these little corrections that Jo does that you see every day probably, but you don't pick up on it, or if you do, you're just a bit stuck about what do I do for that, or where do I cue differently in that move to allow that emphasis to really come through, and what am I looking for that move to be able to do. So that was an absolute joy. Okay, so going to these conventions, it's all about the swag. I feel like it's a Justin Bieber song, like swag, swag. Anyway, so the swag this year, they stepped it up a notch, I'm not gonna lie. So in one of the days we got these little magnets, which are super cool because it has all 34 moves on there, and it's just such a fun way to be able to put up, to be able to plan your class. So yeah, good call on that. We also had some bands, which are always going to come in handy, so thanks for that. And that was from the double band session on day 1. And of course we have things like water bottles, which are always handy, and I'm just throwing these on the floor and I'm hoping they'll survive. Please tell me they do. And things like notebooks and pens and such. I think what was really special about about the equipment day was, and I've just broken it, so my apologies, was this original piece that Joseph Pilates used himself. So this is essentially a little beanbag tied, or it would have been tied, to a dowel. And so what Joseph Pilates used this for was what you can use it for rather, is to help with wrist issues. So as long as I don't break it again, this really does tie through, I promise. Okay, so what you do is you work through the wrist and allow the beanbag to drop, and I'm doing this rather quickly, and eventually it would come back up. I don't know, whoops. Good, please don't kill me, Joe. Okay, so we do something like that. I hope that's in shot. You do it with both arms, of course. So that was definitely a good surprise. I mean, if they were filmed with gummy bears next year, that would have been a lot more fun, but I'll give it to you. So, my take on the J Pilates convention was that it was so much fun. Of course, I'm a little biased because it's the third one I've gone to, but what I'd say is you don't necessarily have to go to the J Pilates convention, but you kind of do. But just go to whatever's available near you or around you, because it's such a great way to get fresh ideas and get inspired for yourself. I think sometimes as instructors we can often operate alone, so we can feel quite isolated, and this is such a great way to be able to network, to meet other instructors, and it honestly felt like a family reunion. Jo and her team make you feel welcome, make you feel warm, and you're able to ask questions and just come away with this big boost. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.